The morning light crept through the lace curtains of the kitchen window, casting delicate patterns across the worn linoleum floor. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on a ceramic casserole dish that had been in my family for 3 generations. The familiar rhythm of washing dishes was a comfort, a small anchor in a life that had increasingly felt adrift. I was 72 years old, and I had been standing at this same sink for 51 years. 51 years of scrubbing pots, drying plates, and wiping down counters. 51 years of preparing meals for a family that had grown up and, for the most part, grown away. The house was quiet now, too quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of the old wooden beams settling. It was the sound of a home that had once been full of laughter and chaos, now reduced to a hollow shell of memory. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and for most of my life, I had been defined by my roles. Wife, mother, grandmother. I had worn those titles with pride, pouring every ounce of my energy into being the best version of each. I had supported my husband, Thomas, through his career, through his illnesses, and eventually through his death. I had raised my children, Derek and Sarah, with unwavering dedication, sacrificing my own dreams so they could chase theirs. I had babysat my grandchildren, hosted holidays, and mended countless broken hearts and scraped knees. I had given and given and given, never once stopping to ask what I was receiving in return. But somewhere along the way, the giving had turned into taking. My children, once grateful for my support, had begun to see me as a resource rather than a person. A bank account, a free babysitter, a convenient solution to their problems. The years of quiet sacrifice had slowly eroded the boundaries between love and obligation, and I had let it happen. I had told myself it was what mothers did. I had told myself it was my duty. I had told myself that one day they would appreciate it. They would see how much I had given, and they would reciprocate. That day had never come. I pulled the plug from the sink, watching the soapy water swirl down the drain with a soft gurgle. My hands were wrinkled and spotted with age, the veins standing out like rivers on a map. They were the hands of a woman who had worked hard her entire life. I dried them on a faded dish towel and walked slowly into the living room, my knees protesting with each step. The living room was my sanctuary, filled with the relics of a lifetime. A faded photograph of Thomas hung above the fireplace, his kind eyes watching over me from a time when we were both young and full of hope. The sofa was worn, the cushions sagging in the spots where we had sat for thousands of evenings, watching television or reading aloud to the children. The bookshelves were crammed with novels, photo albums, and knickknacks collected from vacations long past. This was my home. This was my life. And it was all I had left. The doorbell rang. Shattering the silence, I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. The sharp, impatient ring was unmistakable. It was Derek, my eldest. The golden child. The one who had inherited his father's ambition and his mother's stubbornness. For better or worse, I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my floral apron before walking to the door. It was a small act of preparation, a way of steeling myself for what was to come. I had learned over the years that visits from Derek were rarely pleasant. They were usually transactional, a brief exchange of pleasantries before he got to the point, what he needed from me this time. I opened the door to find my son standing on the porch, his face a mask of forced patience. He was dressed in a crisp suit, his hair perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of a boardroom, which he probably had. Derek was a successful real estate developer, a man who had built a small empire on the backs of other people's dreams. He had the sharp, calculating eyes of a man who always knew the value of things, including people. "Mother," he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. He stepped past me without waiting for an invitation, his shoes clicking on the hardwood floor of the foyer. "We need to talk." I closed the door slowly, my heart beginning to race. That phrase, "we need to talk," had never once been followed by good news. I followed him into the living room, where he was already standing in the center, his hands on his hips, surveying the space with a critical eye. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. It was my default response, a way of diffusing tension with a ritual of hospitality. "No, thank you," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I don't have time for tea. I have a meeting in an hour. This won't take long." I sat down in my armchair, the familiar embrace of the worn fabric offering a small measure of comfort. Derek remained standing, towering over me like a judge delivering a verdict. His presence was oppressive, filling the room with an energy that felt more like a threat than a visit. "I'm going to get straight to the point," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we've come to a decision. It's time for you to sell the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I had expected many things from this visit, but not this. Not the house. Not the only thing I had left. "Excuse me," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't act so surprised, Mother," Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're 72 years old. You can't maintain this place by yourself. It's a money pit. The roof is leaking, the furnace is ancient, and the wiring is probably a fire hazard. It's not sustainable." "I've managed just fine," I said, my voice gaining a hint of strength. "I've lived here for 51 years. Your father and I raised you in this house. This is my home." "Sentimentality is not a valid argument," he said flatly. "The market is hot right now. We could get top dollar for this place. The money would be a huge help to the family. The boys are going to college soon, and we could use the extra funds. Sarah and I have been looking at a new house, and this would be a perfect down payment." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. He was talking about my house, my life's foundation, as if it were a commodity to be bought and sold. He wasn't asking. He was telling. And he was using his own children, my grandchildren, as leverage. "The boys have scholarships," I said, my voice trembling. "I helped them apply for them myself. They don't need the money." "They could use it for other things," Derek said, waving a dismissive hand. "Better schools, nicer clothes, a new car. You want what's best for them, don't you? This is what's best." "What's best?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "What's best for them? Or what's best for you?" His eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp anger. "Don't start with that, Mother. You have no idea what it's like to live in the real world. You've been sitting in this house, hiding from life, for years. You don't know what it takes to build a future. We do. And we need the money." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I had raised, the child who used to run to me with scraped knees and tear-filled eyes. But that boy was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. And in that moment, the years of silent sacrifice, the endless giving, the quiet acceptance of being taken for granted, it all crystallized into a single, sharp point of anger. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, a tiny, defiant spark in the darkness. Derek blinked, clearly taken aback. "No, what do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Derek. I am not selling my house. This is my home. It's the only thing I have left. I will not give it up just because you want a nicer house or a better car. I have given you everything. I have given you my time, my energy, my love, and my money. I have nothing left to give." His face reddened, a vein pulsing in his temple. "You're being unreasonable. You're not thinking clearly. The house is an asset. It's not a museum. It's not a shrine to Dad. It's a building, and it's worth a lot of money." "It's worth more than money," I said, my voice steady for the first time. "It's worth the memories. It's worth the life I built here. You don't get to take that away from me." Derek took a step closer, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You're making a mistake, Mother. If you don't sell, you're going to regret it. I'm trying to help you, but I can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped." "I don't want your help," I said, rising from my chair to face him. "I've never asked for your help. I've never asked for anything. I've given and given and given, and the one time I need something, the one time I need you to let me keep the one thing I have, you refuse. That's not help. That's greed." The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. Derek's face contorted with anger, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike me. But he didn't. Instead, He took a step back, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. "Fine," he spat, his voice cold as ice. "You want to be stubborn, go ahead. But don't come crying to me when you can't afford the repairs. Don't come crying to me when you can't get out of bed, because your arthritis is acting up. You're all alone in this world, mother. And when you finally realize that, it'll be too late." He turned on his heel and strode toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silent house. I followed him, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. He paused at the threshold, his back still to me. "One more thing," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I want the keys to the house. I want a copy of the deed. I want to see the will. If you're going to be difficult, I'm going to make sure I know exactly what I'm dealing with." I stared at his back, the words slowly sinking in. He wanted the keys. He wanted the deed. He wanted control. He wasn't just trying to sell my house. He was trying to take everything. For 51 years, I had been a dutiful mother. I had sacrificed my dreams for my children. I had given them everything I had. And this was how they repaid me, by trying to strip me of my last shred of independence. "No," I said again, my voice ringing with newfound strength. "You cannot have the keys. You cannot have the deed. You cannot have anything. This is my house, my life, and you will not take it from me." Derek turned to face me, his expression a mask of barely contained rage. "You'll regret this, mother. Mark my words. You'll regret this." He strode out the door, slamming it behind him with a force that rattled the windows. I stood there, my back against the wall, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The silence of the house pressed in around me, oppressive and suffocating. I walked slowly back to the living room and sank into my armchair, my hands trembling. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled down my cheeks. I had just had the most difficult confrontation of my life. I had stood up to my son, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow. I had just alienated the only family I had left. Or so I thought. It was then that I remembered the old oak desk in the study, the one that had belonged to my grandfather. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of yellowed papers, was a letter. A letter from an old friend, a lawyer, who had long since retired. It was a letter I had dismissed years ago. Too preoccupied with my duties as a mother and wife to even read it fully, I rose from the chair and walked to the study, my knees aching with each step. The desk was dusty, untouched for years. I opened the bottom drawer, the wood groaning in protest, and pulled out the stack of papers. At the bottom, yellowed with age, was an envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands, the paper crackling as I unfolded it. The letter was dated over 20 years ago, from a law firm I had never heard of. My eyes scanned the words, my breath catching in my throat. Asterisk, "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, asterisk, asterisk, we are writing to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of a trust fund established by your late grandfather, Harold Whitmore. The trust was set up in 1965 and has been managed by our firm for the past 30 years. As of the date of this letter, the value of the trust is approximately $8 million, asterisk. Asterisk, we have been attempting to reach you for several years, but our previous correspondence appears to have been lost. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange the transfer of assets. Asterisk, I stared at the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. $8 million. I had been sitting on a fortune for decades, and I had never even known it. My grandfather, who I had always remembered as a kind but distant man, had left me a legacy that would change everything. The weight of the revelation pressed down on me, and I felt a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me. It was a laugh tinged with disbelief, with irony, with a sharp, bitter joy. All these years I had scraped and saved, giving everything I had to my children. And all along, I had the means to live comfortably, independently, on my own terms. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, my mind racing. Derek wanted my house. He wanted my keys. He wanted my life. But he had no idea what I was really worth. He had no idea that I held the power to rewrite the entire script. I walked to the window and stared out at the garden, the roses I had planted with Thomas still blooming in the afternoon sun. The world looked different now. The colors were brighter, the air was fresher, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I thought I had lost forever. I hoped my son had tried to take everything from me, but he had only succeeded in handing me the key to my own liberation. The confrontation was far from over, but the battle had shifted. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman with resources, with options, and with a fire in my heart that had been smoldering for far too long. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letter, my voice steady and clear when the receptionist answered. "Hello," I said. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I believe you have been trying to reach me." The phone call lasted exactly 47 minutes. I counted every second, my hand gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles ached. The voice on the other end belonged to a young woman named Jennifer, a paralegal at the firm that had been managing my grandfather's trust for 3 decades. She was efficient, professional, and utterly bewildered by my existence. "Mrs. Whitmore, we sent multiple letters over the years," she explained, her voice tinged with apology. "The last one was returned as undeliverable. We assumed you had moved or passed away." "I never received them," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I've lived in the same house for 51 years. The mail must have been lost, or perhaps someone in my family intercepted it." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I didn't want to believe it, but the thought had already taken root. My children had always handled my mail, especially in recent years. Derek had insisted it was easier, that he could manage my bills and paperwork while I focused on resting. I had been grateful for the help. Now I wondered if it had been help at all. Jennifer explained the details of the trust with remarkable patience. My grandfather, Harold Whitmore, had been a shrewd businessman, a man who had built a small fortune in the shipping industry and invested it wisely. He had set up the trust for me when I was a young woman, just married to Thomas, with the intention of providing me with financial security for life. He had apparently seen something in me that I had forgotten existed: resilience, independence, and the capacity to stand on my own 2 feet. The trust had grown substantially over the decades, thanks to careful management and compound interest. The $8 million was just the beginning. There were also properties, stocks, and bonds, all carefully diversified and earning steady returns. I wasn't just comfortable. I was wealthy. Wealthier than I had ever imagined possible. When I finally hung up the phone, I stood in the study for a long time, staring at the wall without seeing it. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and a fierce, burning hope. I had spent my entire life giving, sacrificing, and shrinking myself to fit the roles others had assigned me. And all along, I had been sitting on a fortune that could have changed everything. But the anger was the sharpest emotion of all. Not at my grandfather, who had left me this incredible gift. Not even at Derek, who had tried to take my house. The anger was at myself. For not reading the letter. For trusting my children with my affairs. For letting myself become invisible in my own life. I walked back to the living room and sat down in my armchair, the letter clutched in my hands. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. The house, which had felt so empty just hours ago, now felt like a fortress. A fortress I had the means to defend. The next day, I made a decision. I called Daniel Reeves, the lawyer whose name Jennifer had given me. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 50s, with a reputation for handling complex estates with discretion and precision. I explained my situation in careful detail, leaving nothing out. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said when I finished, his voice low and thoughtful, "this is an extraordinary situation. Your children have been managing your affairs without your explicit consent, and there's evidence to suggest they may have been concealing assets from you. That's not just unethical. It could be illegal." "I don't want to press charges," I said quickly. "They're my children. I don't want to destroy them. I just want to protect myself." Daniel was silent for a moment. "I understand your reluctance, but I need you to understand the gravity of this. If they've been intercepting your mail or misrepresenting your financial situation, they've committed fraud. At the very least, they've violated your trust. If you want to protect yourself, you need to be prepared for the possibility that they won't take this lying down." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I know. But I'm not the same woman I was yesterday. I'm not going to let them walk all over me anymore. That's good, he said, a note of approval in his voice. That's exactly what we need. Let me start by securing your assets. I'll have the trust transferred to a new account, one that only you can access. I'll also place a freeze on your credit and notify the relevant institutions that you are the sole authority on your financial matters. If your children try to access anything, they'll hit a brick wall. Do it, I said firmly. Whatever it takes. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Daniel worked tirelessly, his team coordinating with banks, investment firms, and the probate court to ensure that every penny of my inheritance was safely in my name. I signed documents, verified my identity, and answered endless questions about my financial history. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. Every signature was a small act of rebellion, a declaration that I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. On the third day, Daniel called with news that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've discovered something," he said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "Your son, Derek, has been accessing your accounts for the past 5 years. He's been transferring small amounts, nothing large enough to raise red flags, into a separate account under his name. It totals just over $50,000. I felt the air leave my lungs.
$50,000.
The money I had saved over decades, pinching pennies and skipping vacations, had been siphoned away by my own son. He had taken it without asking, without telling me, without a single thought for the woman who had given him everything. "That's not all," Daniel continued. "He's also taken out a line of credit in your name. A home equity loan against the house. The balance is substantial, and the payments are overdue." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "A home equity loan? How I never signed anything." "He forged your signature," Daniel said grimly. "It's a felony, Mrs. Whitmore. If you want to press charges, we have more than enough evidence." I closed my eyes, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. My son, my firstborn, the child I had held in my arms and rocked to sleep, had been systematically stealing from me. He had lied to me. He had manipulated me. And when I had refused to give him what he wanted, he had tried to take it by force. "No charges," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper.
"Not yet."
"I want to confront him first. I want to look him in the eye and give him a chance to explain himself. If he lies, if he tries to deny it, then we'll talk about legal action." "That's your choice," Daniel said, "but I want you to understand the risk. He's already shown he's willing to break the law. Confronting him could escalate things." "I know," I said, "but I need to do this. For my own sake. I need to know if there's anything left of the son I raised." The confrontation came 4 days later. I didn't invite Derek to my house. Instead, I arranged to meet him at a small cafe in the village, a neutral space where I felt I had the upper hand. He arrived late, as usual, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression one of impatient annoyance. "Mother," he said, slipping into the seat across from me without a greeting. "This is a surprise. I didn't think you left the house anymore." I ignored the barb, my gaze steady on his face. "I wanted to talk to you about something important. Something I think you'll find interesting." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "I'm listening." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward him. "I've been going through some old paperwork. It turns out my grandfather, your great-grandfather, left me a trust fund. It's worth a significant amount of money." Derek's eyes flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or greed. He picked up the folder and began flipping through the documents, his face a careful mask of neutrality. But I saw the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his fingers tightened on the paper. "Interesting," he said, setting the folder down. "I had no idea. You've never mentioned it." "Neither did you," I said, my voice cold. "Did you know about the home equity loan? Derek, the one you took out in my name?" The color drained from his face. For a moment, he was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Then the mask slipped back into place, and he laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "I don't know what you're talking about." That must be a mistake. It's not a mistake, I said flatly. I have the documents. I have the signatures. I have everything I need to prove that you've been stealing from me for years. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Derek's eyes darted around the cafe, searching for an escape that didn't exist. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, devoid of the warmth he had once shown me. Fine, he said. You want to know the truth? Yes, I took the money. I needed it. Do you have any idea what it's like to support a family, to send kids to college, to keep up appearances? You've never had to worry about any of that. You've been living in your little bubble, completely oblivious to the real world.
His words hit me like a slap.
I gave you everything, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. I gave you my time, my energy, my love. I gave you every penny I had. And this is how you repay me: by stealing from me, by lying to me. You gave me what you wanted to give, he shot back, his voice rising. You never asked what I needed.
You always made it about you.
Poor, self-sacrificing Eleanor, giving everything to her ungrateful children. Did you ever stop to think that maybe I didn't want your charity? Maybe I wanted you to treat me like an equal, instead of a child who owes you everything. I stared at him, my heart pounding. The anger that had been building in my chest for years finally erupted, flooding my veins with a fierce, righteous heat. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Get out of my sight, Derek. You're not my son. You're a stranger. And I will not let you take another thing from me. He rose from his chair, his face a mask of barely contained fury. You'll regret this, Mother. I promise you that. When you're old and alone, and no one visits you, remember this moment. Remember that you pushed away the only family you had left. He stormed out of the cafe, the door swinging shut behind him. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling, my heart racing. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The burden I had been carrying for decades had finally been lifted. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel's number. It's done, I said. I want to proceed with the legal action.
He's taken enough from me.
It's time he learned the consequences. As I hung up, I felt a strange, exhilarating sense of freedom. My son had tried to take everything from me, and in doing so, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the courage to fight back. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer the same woman who had stood at that kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes and burying her pain. I was a woman with power, with resources, and with a fire that no amount of selfishness could extinguish. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and I was ready. The week that followed my confrontation with Derek was unlike any other in my life. For the first time in decades, I woke each morning without the weight of obligation pressing down on my chest. The house, which had once felt like a monument to my sacrifices, now felt like a sanctuary. I spent my days tending to my garden, reading novels I had been meaning to get to for years, and cooking meals that I actually enjoyed eating. The simple pleasures I had denied myself for so long tasted sweeter than I could have imagined. But I knew the peace wouldn't last. Derek was not the kind of man to slink away quietly after being exposed. He was a fighter, and he had been fighting his entire life, against rivals, against competitors, and now, against me. I had seen the look in his eyes at the cafe, that cold, calculating gleam that promised retribution. He wasn't done with me. He was just regrouping. The first sign of his retaliation came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and flipping through the newspaper, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of a local bank, one of the institutions where I had an account. I answered with a sense of foreboding. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Margaret from the security department at First National. I'm calling to inform you that there's been an attempt to access your account using a forged signature. We flagged the transaction and placed a hold on the funds. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of transaction? A wire transfer of $50,000 to an offshore account. The request was submitted online using your account credentials, but the signature on the authorization form didn't match our records. We need you to confirm whether you authorized this transfer. No, I said, my voice cold. I didn't authorize anything. I want the account frozen immediately. I want every transaction for the past 6 months reviewed. And I want a record of the IP address used to submit the request. Margaret's tone shifted, becoming more serious. We'll have our fraud team look into it right away, Mrs. Whitmore. In the meantime, I recommend changing your passwords and enabling two-factor authentication on all your accounts. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, my heart pounding. Derek had tried to steal from me again. Not content with the $50,000 he had already taken, he had reached for more. And he had been smart enough to cover his tracks, or at least to try. But he had made a mistake. He had underestimated me. I called Daniel immediately and explained the situation. He listened in silence, his breathing slow and measured. "This is a pattern, Mrs. Whitmore," he said when I finished. "He's testing your defenses. He's trying to see if you're paying attention. If you let this slide, he'll escalate. You need to send a clear message that you are not to be trifled with. What do you suggest? File a police report. Press charges for attempted fraud. And let him know that you have a lawyer who is prepared to take this all the way." The thought of involving the police made my stomach churn. Derek was my son. No matter what he had done, the instinct to protect him was still there, buried deep beneath the layers of hurt and anger. But the old Eleanor would have let him walk all over her. The old Eleanor would have made excuses for him, would have blamed herself for his actions. The old Eleanor was gone. "Let's do it," I said. "File the report." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Daniel filed a formal complaint with the police department, and I was interviewed by a detective who took my statement with careful, professional detachment. I provided copies of the forged documents, the bank records, and the timeline of Derek's financial misconduct. The evidence was damning, and the detective assured me that an arrest warrant would be issued within days. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt a sense of justice. Instead, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. The mother in me was still mourning the loss of the son she had raised. But the woman I was becoming was learning to accept that the son she had raised no longer existed. The arrest came on a Friday afternoon. I learned about it from a brief, terse call from Daniel, who informed me that Derek had been taken into custody at his office and was being held at the county jail. His wife, Patricia, had apparently been frantic, calling everyone she knew to try and secure his release. But the charges were serious, and the judge had set bail at an amount that would be difficult to post. I didn't visit him. I didn't call his lawyer. I didn't reach out to Patricia, who had been a silent accomplice in Derek's schemes, complicit in her own way. I simply sat in my living room, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor, and felt a profound, aching silence where my love for my son used to be. The next evening, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden, pruning my roses, when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I looked up to see a familiar sedan, and my heart sank. It was Patricia. She got out of the car slowly, her movements hesitant, her face pale and drawn. She looked older than I remembered, the careful veneer of her wealthy suburban life stripped away to reveal the frightened, exhausted woman underneath. She walked toward me, her heels sinking into the soft earth of the garden. "Eleanor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I set down my pruning shears and wiped my hands on my apron. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Patricia." "Please," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know what Derek did was wrong. I know we've hurt you. But I'm begging you, please don't do this. He's your son. He's the father of your grandchildren. If he goes to prison, the boys will be destroyed. Their lives will be ruined." The mention of my grandsons was a deliberate, calculated blow, and Patricia knew it. She was using them as leverage, just as Derek had done. But I was no longer the woman who could be manipulated by guilt. "The boys don't know the truth, Patricia," I said, my voice soft but firm. "They think their father is a successful businessman, a pillar of the community. They don't know he's been stealing from me for years. They don't know he tried to steal my house. And they don't know he tried to steal my money after I confronted him. If Derek goes to prison, that's on him, not on me. He made his choices." Patricia's composure cracked. She began to cry, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs.
You don't understand. He's not a bad man.
He's just desperate. He was trying to provide for us. For the boys. He was trying to give us the life he thought we deserved. By stealing from his mother, I said, my voice sharpening. By lying to her, by forging her signature, that's not desperation, Patricia. That's greed. And I'm done enabling it. She looked at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperation. What do you want? What can I do to make this right? I'll do anything. Just tell me what you need. I stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. The wind rustled the leaves of the rose bushes, carrying the scent of earth and petals. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing for my family, the years I had given and given until there was nothing left of me. I thought about the letter I had found, the trust my grandfather had left me, the promise of a future I had never dared to imagine. I don't want anything from you, Patricia, I said finally. I don't need your apologies or your promises or your tears. I need you to understand that I am done being a doormat. I am done being taken for granted. If Derek wants to rebuild his life, he needs to do it on his own terms. He needs to face the consequences of his actions. And he needs to earn back my trust, if that's even possible. But that's not something you can do for him. Patricia's face crumpled, and she let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She stood there for a moment, swaying on her feet, before turning and stumbling back to her car. She drove away without looking back, leaving me alone in the quiet garden. I sat down on the stone bench next to the roses, my hands trembling. The encounter had drained me, but it had also fortified me. I had held my ground. I had refused to be manipulated. And I had taken the first step toward true, unshakable independence. Later that evening, I received a call from Daniel. Mrs. Whitmore, there's been a development. Derek's lawyer has reached out to discuss a plea deal. He wants to avoid a trial, and he's willing to accept a lesser charge in exchange for returning the stolen funds and agreeing to undergo counseling. And what do you recommend? I asked. I recommend we negotiate, Daniel said. We have him on felony charges, but a trial would be drawn out and costly. If he's willing to plead guilty to a misdemeanor and repay everything he owes, plus interest and legal fees, it might be the best outcome for everyone involved. I thought about Patricia's tears, about the boys, about the years I had spent building a life for my family. I thought about the woman I was becoming, the woman who had finally learned to say no. Tell his lawyer I'll agree to the deal, I said, but only under one condition. Derek has to write a letter of apology to me, a genuine one, and he has to make it public. I want him to tell the truth about what he did, so that no one can ever question my integrity again. Daniel was silent for a moment. That's a bold move, Mrs. Whitmore. It's going to ruin his reputation. His reputation was built on lies, I said. It's time he faced the truth. If he agrees, I'll drop the felony charges. If he doesn't, we go to trial. The next morning, Daniel called me with the news. Derek had agreed. His letter arrived by courier 2 days later. It was brief, carefully worded, and painfully obvious that it had been written under duress. But it was enough. It was an admission, a confession, a public acknowledgement of the wrong he had done. I read the letter 3 times, my eyes scanning the words, my heart a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who had tried to destroy me. But the stranger was finally facing the consequences of his actions. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with my grandfather's trust documents. The next chapter of my life was still unfolding, and I was determined to write it on my own terms. I had reclaimed my house, my money, and my dignity, and the battle, though painful, had left me stronger than I had ever been. The peace I had found was real, and it was mine. For the first time in decades, I was no longer defined by my obligations. I was defined by my choices. And I had chosen to be free. The weeks that followed Derek's public confession were strange and quiet. The house settled into a new rhythm, one that felt lighter, freer, as if the very walls had exhaled after holding their breath for years. I found myself sleeping better, waking with a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long I had forgotten what it felt like. The garden flourished under my care, the roses blooming in shades of crimson and gold that seemed brighter than ever before. But the silence was also lonely. For all the years I had spent resenting Derek's visits and Patricia's patronizing smiles, I had grown accustomed to the noise of their presence. The phone rang less frequently now. The doorbell remained silent. The grandchildren, whom I had once seen every other weekend, had not visited since the arrest. I understood why. Patricia was protecting them from the ugliness of what had happened, and I couldn't fault her for that. But the absence of their laughter, their small hands reaching for cookies in my kitchen, left a gap that nothing else could fill. I tried to fill it with activity. I joined a book club at the local library, a group of women my age who gathered once a week to discuss literature and life. They were kind, welcoming, and refreshingly uninterested in my family drama. With them, I was just Eleanor, a woman who loved historical fiction and had strong opinions about character development. It was liberating to be seen without the weight of my past. I also began volunteering at the community center, teaching basic financial literacy to older adults who, like me, had been blindsided by the complexities of modern banking. It was a small thing, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I had learned so much in the past few months about trusts, about fraud, about the importance of vigilance, and I wanted to share that knowledge with others who might be vulnerable. But the past has a way of creeping back into the present, no matter how hard you try to leave it behind. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky a soft, hazy blue, when I received an unexpected visit from my daughter, Sarah. She arrived without warning, her car pulling into the driveway as I was weeding the front garden. I looked up, surprised, and watched her climb out of the driver's seat with the same hesitant, uncertain movements that Patricia had displayed weeks before. Sarah was younger than Derek by 4 years, but she had always been the quieter of the two, the one who kept her distance from family conflicts. She lived 2 states away, married to a kind but unassuming man named Mark, and had built a life far from the drama of her brother's schemes. I hadn't heard from her since the arrest, and I had assumed she was keeping her distance deliberately. "Mom," she said, walking toward me with a tentative smile. "I hope it's okay that I came. I should have called, but I didn't want to give you a chance to say no." I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, and opened my arms. She stepped into the embrace, and for a moment, I felt the familiar warmth of her presence, the familiar scent of her perfume. She was still my daughter, even if the distance between us had grown. "Of course it's okay," I said, pulling back to look at her. "You're always welcome here, Sarah. You know that." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know. I didn't know how to face you. After everything Derek did. After everything I didn't do." I led her inside, and we sat in the living room, the same room where Derek had demanded my keys just months before. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the familiar furniture. I made tea, the ritual soothing in its familiarity, and we sat together in the quiet. "I'm not going to lie," Sarah said, her voice low. "I was angry at you when I heard about the arrest. Not because I thought Derek was innocent, but because I felt like you should have come to me first. I felt like you should have given me a chance to help, to mediate, before everything blew up." I set down my teacup, my heart aching. "I should have, Sarah.
I'm sorry.
I was so caught up in my own anger, my own pain, that I didn't think about how it would affect you. I'm sorry for that." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I wasn't angry at you for long. I started thinking about everything that happened, everything Derek did, and I realized I had been complicit in a different way. I knew something was wrong. I saw the way he treated you. I heard the things he said. But I told myself it wasn't my problem. I told myself it was between you and him. And I let it happen. I let him hurt you. And I did nothing." The admission hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were trying to protect yourself, Sarah. I understand that. Derek can be overwhelming. He's always been the dominant one, the one who takes control. It's hard to stand up to that. I should know." She squeezed my hand, a gesture of gratitude. "I've been talking to Mark about it," she said. "He helped me see things more clearly. I need to be better, Mom. I need to be more present. Not just for you, but for myself. I've been hiding from my own family, and that's not right. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easier than it had in years. She told me about her life, her work, her struggles with balancing career and family. I told her about the trust, about my grandfather, about the new sense of freedom I had found. She listened without judgment, nodding and asking questions, and for the first time, I felt like I had an ally. Before she left, she made me a promise. I'm going to talk to Derek, she said. I'm going to tell him that I know what he did, and that I'm not going to let him off the hook. If he wants to be part of this family again, he's going to have to earn it. And I'm going to make sure he understands that. I didn't try to stop her. If anything, I felt a sense of relief. Sarah had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over. But peacemaking without accountability was just enabling. It was time for her to find her own voice, just as I had found mine. The weeks that followed were marked by small but significant changes. Sarah called regularly, her voice warm and present. She even brought the grandchildren for a weekend visit, and I watched them play in the garden, their laughter filling the house with a joy I had almost forgotten. They were innocent in all of this, and I was determined to keep it that way. But the most surprising change came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized. It was from Derek. The envelope was plain, the postmark local. I opened it with trembling hands, unsure of what to expect. The letter was brief, only a few paragraphs. But the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Asterisk, dear Mom. Asterisk, asterisk, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did, and I'm ashamed. I was so focused on what I thought I needed that I forgot to see you as a person. I forgot that you had your own dreams, your own pain, your own life. I treated you like a resource, and I'm so sorry. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm in counseling now. It's hard, and I don't always like what I see in myself. But I'm trying to change. I'm trying to be better. Not because I want something from you, but because I want to be someone you can be proud of again. Asterisk, asterisk, I don't know if we'll ever have the relationship we once had. Maybe that's too much to hope for. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you did for me. I was too blind to see it before, but I see it now. Asterisk, asterisk, take care of yourself, Mom. You deserve to be happy. Asterisk. Love. Derek, I read the letter 3 times, my tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. The apology was raw, imperfect, and painfully honest. It was more than I had ever expected from him. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with my grandfather's trust documents. I didn't know if I could fully forgive Derek, not yet. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that healing was possible. The next day, I called Daniel and asked him to set up a meeting with Derek's lawyer. I had a proposal to make. I wanted to offer Derek a path back, a way to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Not as a doormat, not as a victim, but as an equal. If he was willing to do the work, I was willing to give him a chance. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The woman who had once been defined by her sacrifices was now defined by her choices. And I chose hope.
I chose forgiveness.
I chose to believe that people could change, even when the evidence said otherwise. The house was quiet that evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea in my hands, and watched the world settle into twilight. The garden was still, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to see what it would bring. I had survived the worst of my family's betrayal, and I had come out stronger on the other side. The next chapter was mine to write, and I intended to make it a good one. The morning of my 73rd birthday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that made the world feel fresh and full of possibility. I woke early, as I always did, and padded barefoot to the kitchen to brew my coffee. The house was quiet, but it was a contented quiet now, the silence of a space that had been healed rather than abandoned. I stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, looking out at the garden. The roses had begun to fade, their petals curling and darkening at the edges, but the chrysanthemums were in full bloom. bursts of gold and bronze that caught the morning light. I thought about all the mornings I had stood at this same sink, scrubbing dishes and bearing my pain, never imagining that I would one day stand here as a woman who had reclaimed her life. The phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. I dried my hands and picked up the receiver, half expecting it to be Sarah with her usual cheerful birthday greeting. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Happy birthday, Mom." It was Derek. His voice was hesitant, uncertain, a far cry from the commanding tone he had used when he demanded my keys. I felt my heart clench, a complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. "Thank you, Derek," I said, my voice steady. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you today." "I know," he said. "I almost didn't call. I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. But I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. I wanted to tell you that I'm thinking about you." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. I could hear the strain in his voice, the effort it was taking for him to reach out. "How are you doing?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. It was the voice of the old Eleanor, the one who had spent a lifetime worrying about her children. But it was also the voice of the new Eleanor, the one who understood that healing required connection. "I'm doing okay," he said. "Counseling is hard. Some days I feel like I'm making progress, and other days I feel like I'm right back where I started. But I'm trying. I really am trying." "I know you are," I said. "I read your letter. It meant a lot to me." "It meant a lot to me to write it," he said. "I never realized how much I needed to say those things. I never realized how much I needed to hear myself say them." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted but genuine. He asked about the garden, about my book club, about the volunteer work I was doing at the community center. He listened without interrupting, without dismissing, and when we said goodbye, I felt a small, tentative warmth in my chest. After I hung up, I stood by the window for a long moment, watching the sunlight spread across the lawn. The relationship between Derek and me would never be what it once was. Too much had happened. Too much had been broken. But perhaps it could be something new, something built on honesty and mutual respect. That was more than I had dared to hope for just a few months ago. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the study, organizing the papers that Daniel had sent over, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, her arms laden with a cake box and a bouquet of sunflowers. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "I know you said you didn't want a party, but I figured you couldn't say no to cake." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its warmth. "I suppose I can't argue with that."
Come in.
She followed me into the kitchen, where she set the cake on the counter and began rummaging through the drawers for plates and forks. I watched her with a sense of quiet wonder. The daughter, who had once kept her distance, was now bustling around my kitchen as if she had never left. "Mark and the boys are coming later," she said, pulling out a knife. "We're going to have a small dinner, just family. I hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay," I said, touched by the effort she had made. "You didn't have to do all this, Sarah." "Yes, I did," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I missed too many birthdays, Mom. I let too many years slip by. I'm not going to let that happen anymore." We spent the afternoon together, baking and talking and laughing. Sarah told me about her work, about the promotion she had been offered, about the new house she and Mark were considering. I told her about the financial literacy classes I was teaching, about the new friends I had made at the book club. The conversation flowed easily, the awkwardness of the past months slowly fading. As the sun began to set, Mark arrived with the boys. They burst through the door, their energy filling the house with a chaos I had missed more than I had realized. They hugged me tightly, their small arms squeezing with an enthusiasm that made my heart ache. "Grandma, we brought you a present," the younger one, Tommy, announced. Thrusting a clumsily wrapped package into my hands, I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a framed photograph of the two of them, their faces smudged with what I suspected was chocolate. I laughed, tears pricking at my eyes. "It's perfect, Tommy. I'll put it right here on the mantel." Dinner was a simple affair. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a salad from my garden. Sarah and Mark did most of the cooking, shooing me out of the kitchen whenever I tried to help. I sat in the living room, watching the boys play with their grandfather's old train set, the one I had kept in the attic for all these years. After dinner, Sarah brought out the cake, a beautiful three-layer chocolate creation that she had ordered from the bakery in the village. They sang happy birthday, their voices ringing through the house in cheerful harmony. I blew out the candles, making a wish that I didn't dare speak aloud. It was only after they had all left, the house falling silent once more, that I allowed myself to reflect on the day. The cake was half-eaten on the counter, the bouquet of sunflowers brightening the kitchen table. The framed photograph of Tommy and his brother now sat on the mantel, a small but significant addition to the collection of memories that filled the room. I walked over to the grandfather clock, the one that had been my mother's. It had been ticking steadily through every moment of joy and sorrow, through every confrontation and reconciliation. I placed my hand on the polished wood, feeling the faint vibration of its mechanism. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was thanking. The clock, my mother, my grandfather, the universe. It didn't matter. The gratitude was real, and it was enough that I thought about the letter I had found in the old oak desk, the one that had changed everything. I had kept it, folded carefully in the drawer with the trust documents, a reminder of the moment when my life had taken a sharp, unexpected turn. I had been so focused on the money, on the power it represented, that I had almost forgotten the deeper lesson it had taught me. The money was important, yes. It had given me the freedom to say no, the resources to fight back, the security to rebuild my life on my own terms. But the true gift had been something else entirely. It had been the realization that I was worthy of respect, of love, of independence. It had been the knowledge that I was not defined by my sacrifices, but by my choices. That I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, the moonlight casting silver shadows across the roses. The world was quiet, peaceful, full of promise. I had survived the worst of my family's betrayal, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more alive than I had been in decades. The next chapter of my life was still unwritten, but I wasn't afraid of it. I had faced my fears, confronted my son, and reclaimed my power. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like a gift rather than a threat. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of the wine Sarah had left behind. I raised it to the empty room, a quiet toast to the woman I had become. To new beginnings, I said, my voice soft but clear. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the background, a gentle, reassuring rhythm that had marked the passage of my life for as long as I could remember. It had witnessed my joys and my sorrows, my triumphs and my defeats. And now, it would witness my rebirth. I took a sip of the wine, savoring the warmth that spread through my chest. The house was silent, but it was a silence filled with possibility. The future was mine to shape, and I intended to make it beautiful. As I turned off the lights and made my way upstairs, I paused at the bottom of the staircase. The framed photograph of the boys glinted on the mantel, catching the last rays of moonlight. The sunflowers were bright against the dark kitchen counter. The cake was a promise of sweetness to come. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached every corner of my soul. The new Eleanor was home, and she was ready for whatever came next.